I was with my brother the morning. They gave the plain sister the task of minding him, and I confess I found it amusing at the time. I am not proud of that. We had arrived at Harwich in the deep of November, Caspian riding half the night with his bad shoulder, me beside him on a horse I did not particularly trust, because a wheel had cracked on the coach, and we were 3 miles from anywhere civilized. The nearest house with a light in it belonged to a family called Severn, a widow, 2 older daughters who wore their good looks the way a man wears a sword he expects to use shoes, and a youngest girl who opened the door herself, holding a candle, her hair unpinned, entirely unbothered by the lateness of the hour. "You are hurt," she said, looking at my brother, not at me. She had the right of it. His shoulder was worse than he admitted. We stayed. My brother was traveling as Mr. Calder. He had done it before, gone quietly into ordinary places to think, to recover, to be no one for a little while. The campaign had left him wanting silence, in a way I did not fully understand until I watched him with her. But that came later. The Severn girls, the 2 elder ones, Dorinda and Cecily, understood within 20 minutes that a well-dressed gentleman of unknown but clearly considerable means had arrived at their door, and they arranged themselves accordingly. Mrs. Severn understood it too. She was a gracious woman in most respects, but she had 2 daughters to see settled, and a third who, as she explained to me rather freely on the second morning, was not yet a concern on that score. "Nell is our quiet one," she said, watching her youngest cross the snowy yard with a basket of pine from the woodshed, entirely alone, apparently content. She has her books and her birds and her music. She does not require managing in the same way. I took this to mean, she is not our best chance, so we do not spend our best energy. Lady Treswick, who came to call that same afternoon and who missed nothing, said it more plainly. She took in the 3 sisters, measured Nell against the other 2, and announced to the room, "Dorinda, you shall sit here beside our guests. Cecily, here. Nell, be a dear and fetch the gentlemen whatever they need. You are so good at being useful." I watched my brother's face. Nothing moved in it, but his eyes went to Nell, who had set down her own cup without a word and risen to do as she was told, and stayed there a beat longer than was required. That was how she became his minder, in the language of that household. While Dorinda played the pianoforte badly and Cecily laughed at everything my brother said, Nell brought the tisane for his shoulder without being asked, found him a German text from the house's modest library that touched most on the engineering question he had mentioned once in passing, and sat across from him at chess on the 3rd evening and played him to a draw in 40 minutes without looking remotely sorry about it. I watched all of this from the corner as I had developed a habit of doing. He did not speak much. He rarely did, in those years. But he listened to her in a way I had not seen him listen to anyone. She talked about the way light moved across the frost on the window glass. She told him about a correspondence she had kept for 3 years with a naturalist in Edinburgh on the subject of migratory birds. She asked him, with no artifice whatsoever, what he missed most about being abroad, and when he said the silence, and then immediately the noise, it was confusing. She laughed, and he smiled, and I looked away because it felt private. A week passed, then another. The shoulder healed. We departed on a Thursday morning. Mr. Calder and his brother and Nell Severns stood in the yard in her plain wool coat and thanked us for our company. She did not simper. She did not press her card into his hand. She said, "I hope the road is kind to you," and went back inside. Caspian said nothing for the first 9 miles. Then he said, "She knew I was someone else." "She suspected, perhaps," I said. "She never asked." "No," I agreed. "She treated me like a man worth speaking to," he said, "before she knew if I was worth anything at all." He did not elaborate. He rarely did. But I had known him all my life, and I recognized what I saw in his face, and I kept my own counsel on the matter. The winter assembly at Harwich came 6 weeks later. I attended because Caspian asked me to, which was unusual enough that I agreed without questions. The Severn family was there, all 3 daughters in the best gowns the household could offer. Dorinda and Cecily were placed at the front of the room by their mother, where the light was good and the eligible men would pass. Nell was placed behind them, near the wall, in a dress that was clean and pressed, and a season out of fashion, with instructions, which I overheard Lady Treswick deliver with the confidence of a woman who has never once doubted her own judgment. To remain pleasant and unobtrusive, dear, and perhaps mind the lemonade table if Mrs. Farrow needs assistance. Nell's face did not change. It was the same composure. I had watched her turn toward chess and cold mornings, and the unremarkable fact of her own invisibility. She nodded and moved toward the wall. I was standing near the door when the footman opened it. My brother entered. He had come as himself. The title announced, the manner announced, the presence of him. Because Caspian, when he chose to be present, was the kind of man who changed the weight of a room, announced. The Grand Duke of Aldenmoor returned from the continent. At a village assembly in Harwick in the 3rd week of December, the room rearranged itself. It always did around him. Mrs. Severn turned from her daughters. Lady Treswick turned from the lemonade table. Dorinda and Cecily, who had not been at the house during his stay and had not seen us before, stood straighter by instinct. He saw none of them. I watched him find her. She was by the far wall, half turned away, looking at nothing in particular. A woman who had been placed where she would not intrude. He crossed the room. He did not rush. He walked with the steadiness of a man who has decided something and is entirely at peace with having decided it, and he stopped in front of Nell Severn and waited until she turned. She looked at him. She looked at him properly, his full face and his full coat, and the quiet certainty on him that had nothing to do with the title and everything to do with the man. "Mr. Calder," she said softly. "Not tonight," he said. "May I have this dance?" I believe the silence in that room lasted a full 4 seconds. I counted. Dorinda's mouth came open. Cecily looked at her mother. Lady Treswick looked at the Grand Duke of Aldenmoor looking at Nell Severn, and her expression was precisely what you would expect from a woman who has just realized, too late, that she has been wrong about something that mattered. Nell looked at his offered hand. Then she looked at his face, and she said yes, in the tone of a woman who is not surprised by very much. She took his hand and walked with him to the center of the floor, and the dancing master called the set, and they opened the assembly together, the Grand Duke of Aldenmoor and the plain sister who had been told to mind the lemonade table. He danced well. She danced better than anyone in that room had apparently noticed she could. I stood by the door and watched and felt something I can only describe as the relief of seeing a thing done right. He told me, afterward, much later, years into their marriage, that he had traveled to 3 counties in disguise because he was tired of being chosen for what he carried and not for what he was. That Nell Severn was the only person he had met in 10 years who had looked at him, a cold man with a bad shoulder and no name she recognized, and found him worth the full attention of her genuine self. She gave me her best conversation, he said, when she thought I had nothing to offer her. That is not a small thing. In my experience, it is in fact the largest thing there is. I remember the way she looked that evening, in her out-of-fashion gown, on the arm of the Grand Duke, while Lady Treswick stood very still near the lemonade table and said nothing at all. Nell did not look triumphant. She looked like a woman who had always known her own worth, and had simply, at last found the one person in the room who knew it too. They were married in the spring, at Aldenmoor, in the chapel that smells of candle wax and old stone. She wore her grandmother's pearls. The naturalist from Edinburgh came, and they talked about birds at the wedding breakfast for 40 minutes, and my brother sat beside her and listened to every word. I have thought, over the years, that there is a certain justice in the way love sometimes moves. Not loudly, not where anyone is looking, but quietly, in a drafty sitting room in November, over a game of chess, while the rest of the world was busy somewhere else entirely.